convoy from the World Food Programme through to Simera. We welcome also the creation in the region of an emergency coordination centre. We hope that its establishment will help implement the plan to send to Tigray 100 lorries carrying humanitarian assistance every day, and also resolving the situation of Eritrean refugees who are in particularly dire straits. We are convinced that in order to address the situation, it is necessary, first and foremost, to depoliticize the North Ethiopian humanitarian file. Providing humanitarian assistance in the context of the ongoing political standoff and the toxic media atmosphere has little chance of success. Nor can we agree with the bias in public focus in the work of humanitarians in Tigray. When providing humanitarian assistance, it's important to pay attention to other regions too, including Amhara, Oromia, and Somali, who also have significant humanitarian needs. These are linked to droughts, floods, plagues of locusts, and problems with planting crops. The basis of these efforts should remain UN General Assembly Resolution 46182 and the UN Guiding Principles on Humanitarian Assistance. We call on OCHA to pay particular attention to establishing privileged and constructive dialogue with the federal government. We fully support, Mr. Secretary General, the work that you've been doing to launch a political dialogue as soon as possible. We are convinced that this dialogue should be led by Ethiopians themselves, with the support, first and foremost, from the African community. Any potential external assistance should be done while fully respecting the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of the country. In June's elections in Ethiopia gave convincing proof that the federal authorities can unify the Ethiopian community. We are convinced that they can independently work towards normalizing the situation and generally put the country back on the right development trajectory. Our African partners and the international community should simply support these efforts of the Ethiopian government. We'd also note in this connection the appointment of the High Representative of the African Union and former President of Nigeria, Obasanjo. It's important to understand also that attempts to undermine the situation and also exert pressure on the democratically elected government of Ethiopia, including through adopting unilateral sanctions, will only further stoke the conflict. Equally, nor will the crisis be solved by discussing it at the Security Council. It would be more effective if each member of the Security Council made its own contribution to resolving the situation. The emphasis should be on quiet diplomacy and bilateral channels of privileged communication. The Russian Federation is ready to ensure this. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China. We have the floor, please.
Mr. President, I thank SG Guterres for his briefing and welcome the presence of Ambassador Ahmed, permanent representative of Ethiopia, to this meeting. At present, the situation in Ethiopia is facing many challenges. Maintaining peace and stability of the country and ensuring peaceful coexistence of all ethnic groups is not only in the common interests of the Ethiopian people, but also vital to peace and the security of the Horn of Africa. It is also the goal that the international community makes joint efforts for. We hope all parties in Ethiopia will resolve conflicts and differences through political dialogue, ease tensions, and avoid further escalation of conflicts, so as to create conditions for achieving peace and reconciliation. China welcomes the Ethiopian government's recent efforts in alleviating the situation in Tigray and neighboring areas. In the meantime, Affected by conflicts, the humanitarian situation in some Ethiopian states has become increasingly grave, and humanitarian needs in states such as Amhara and Afar have increased. We hope all parties in Ethiopia will continue to make efforts to expand humanitarian access and ensure the timely delivery of humanitarian goods to its people. China has provided emergency food assistance to the Tigray region, and we call on the international community to step up humanitarian assistance. International humanitarian agencies, while carrying out their work, should uphold the guiding principles of the UN for humanitarian assistance and respect the sovereignty of Ethiopia. China firmly supports Ethiopia's efforts in safeguarding national sovereignty and unity, and will continue to support the Ethiopian people in achieving national peace, stability, development, and prosperity. We hope the international community will support the Ethiopian government in achieving a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire and effectively promoting national reconciliation. China opposes interference by external forces in Ethiopia's internal affairs in the name of human rights and humanitarianism. We support the AU and the regional countries to resolve African issues in the African way and welcome the appointment of the former ambassador of Nigeria, Obasanjo, as the High Representative for African Affairs of the AU. We hope the UN and AU will strengthen their collaboration and jointly play a constructive role in promoting reconciliation among all Ethiopian parties through dialogue. The unilateral sanctions imposed by individual country on Ethiopia are inconsistent with the international law and the basic norms of international relations. Instead of resolving conflicts, they will only interfere with the political settlement. China believes the Ethiopian government has the ability and wisdom to handle its internal affairs well, and firmly believes the Ethiopian people can overcome difficulties and tackle the current challenges. China stands ready to work along with the international community to support Ethiopia's commitment to national unity, restoration of stability, and achievement of development. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico. You have the floor, please.
Senor President, thank you very much. I would like to start, as others have done, by expressing our deep condolences to the families of the victims who lost their lives in the attack recently in Kabul. Mexico would like to thank Ireland, the United States, Estonia, France, Norway, and the United Kingdom for convening this session. We also thank the Secretary General for his frank briefing. Frank, whilst worrisome, and we thank him for his efforts and dedication to the situation in Ethiopia. We would also like to welcome the representative of Ethiopia. In just a few months, President, it will be a year since the beginning of the hostilities in Tigray. The conflict has left thousands of civilians dead, displaced around 2 million people, and hundreds of thousands more are facing famine. Over 90% of the population requires some level of humanitarian assistance. Against this backdrop, we are particularly disquieted over reports stating that clashes have extended to the Afar and Amhara regions, increasing the number of internally displaced and the need for additional assistance. Moreover, the conflict has involved other protagonists at both national and regional level. Ethiopia is a friendly country to Mexico, and we are bound by historic and fraternal links. Ethiopia has played a key role in the stability of the Horn of Africa for decades. As well as being the headquarters of the African Union, it's an important troop contributor to peacekeeping efforts. Therefore, a prolongation of the conflict would not only have disastrous consequences for millions of Ethiopians, but would also represent a high risk of destabilization for the region. Once again, Mexico reiterates its call upon all parties to the conflict for an immediate ceasefire. We also call for the withdrawal of all non-Ethiopian troops from Tigray, as well as of militias not from neighboring federal states. Mexico calls upon the Ethiopian authorities to guarantee the protection of their citizens, independently of their ethnic origin or political affiliations. Reports of sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls and serious violations against children must be investigated and those responsible brought to justice. We are eagerly awaiting the results of the joint investigation underway by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. President, Mexico welcomes the efforts of the United Nations and other humanitarian actors to deliver humanitarian assistance to Tigray. We regret the fact that humanitarian activities continue to face challenges, and in particular, the fact that humanitarian aid cannot reach certain regions. Interruptions in communications, fuel, and the banking system have repercussions on the abilities of the humanitarian community to provide assistance. We underscore the need to re-establish these services and to ensure unimpeded humanitarian access so as to avoid further deterioration in the already critical situation. A lack of access to food could result in a massive famine, as we have already heard here. Whilst the lack of basic services, medicines, and medical supplies of an essential nature exacerbate the risk of transmissible preventable diseases. Moreover, Mexico strongly urges all parties to the conflict to respect the norms of international humanitarian and human rights laws. In particular, the protection of civilians and essential infrastructure, as well as humanitarian personnel. In this regard, we reiterate the need to investigate all attacks against civilians and humanitarian personnel so as to avoid impunity. President, to conclude, I would like to say that if one thing has been made abundantly clear during this period, it is that there is no military solution to the conflict in Ethiopia, and as we have heard from many delegations. In this regard, we recognize the regional efforts to mediate and seek a political solution. Mexico calls upon all parties to the conflict to put the well-being of millions of people ahead of their own interests, and to immediately initiate an inclusive dialogue with a view to beginning the process of national reconciliation and reconstruction. And that is why we welcome the appointment of the former Nigerian President Obasanjo as High Representative for the Corn of Africa to the African Union. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the African 3+1, namely Kenya, Niger, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Tunisia. I thank the Secretary General for his briefing on the latest developments in Ethiopia. We commend his engagement with Ethiopian leadership, the African Union, and regional leaders. We believe that his good offices can play an important role in facilitating a resolution of the current situation. We have heard the important information, insights, and concerns expressed by our fellow members of the Security Council. We indeed share similar points of view with many of them. The violence presently afflicting the people and country of Ethiopia is a product of conflicting views of the country's future. It has erupted and worsened because the country's conflict prevention and resolution tools have until now been inadequate to the task. The resolution to this crisis requires that we undertake a mediation of the deep divides as part of an Ethiopian-owned process supported by the available peace and security architecture and practices, especially those of the African Union. As the A3+1, we observe that on every side of the conflict, there is a growing perception of ethnic identity being the basis of conflict. The opposed sides give short shrift to each other's grievances and regard opposition to their own view as illegitimate. These opposed constituencies, reflecting the present political character of Ethiopia, are organized along ethnic lines. This makes them uniquely dangerous because they easily conflate political opposition to a struggle between ethnicities. We have witnessed with profound concern the resulting terrible harms that have befallen innocent civilians. And if the present course is not changed, we fear that it may get far worse. We have condemned and continue to condemn the violence against civilians, the killing of boys and men not in uniform, the destruction of civilian objects, the confrontations that have led to the blocking of humanitarian aid being delivered to desperate families. In particular, we register our strongest protest against the horrific human rights violations and acts of sexual violence perpetrated against girls and women. Our values as a continent, as captured with such gravity in the African Union's Constitutive Act, demand respect for the sanctity of human life and the condemnation and rejection of impunity. To put an end to this violence, our values must inspire and drive practical action. Africa's peace and security architecture underpinned by our Constitutive Act. Foremost among those mechanisms, and one that is available to Ethiopia immediately, is the right of member states to request intervention from the Union in order to restore peace and security. We welcome the appointment by the chairperson of the African Union Commission of former President Olusegun Obasanjo as the High Representative of the Horn of Africa region. His mandate is to promote peace, security, and stability on behalf of the region. We urge all regional leaders and the broad international community to lend him every assistance, particularly as he supports a peace process in Ethiopia. That process must promote and protect human and people's rights. It must be clear in assuring the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Ethiopia. It should be genuinely inclusive to promote unity, solidarity, cohesion, and cooperation among the peoples of Ethiopia and the Ethiopian state. To allow space for it, we therefore urge the government of Ethiopia to remove all legal, administrative, and security barriers to a political dialogue. No matter what has come to pass, the government needs to acknowledge the existence of legitimate grievances and to understand that they must be resolved peacefully. We must also pronounce our concern and caution about the rallying of the civilian population to the conflict. Though it may be intended to marshal the patriotic spirit of the people, it can lead to an uncontrollable spiral of violence and bloodshed. There are those who will take it to be an invitation to acts of collective punishment against civilians. This is the time for leadership to urge calm, to give confidence that the country has the ability to overcome even this greatest of challenges with its growing democratic instincts. To the armed actors in Tigray, the TPLF or the TDF, we urge the withdrawal from neighboring regions and a halt to the rallying of other armed actors. The further they advance outside Tigray, the greater the danger to the people on whose behalf they claim to be acting. Escalating political tensions in other parts of the country will not solve the crisis. It will only widen the divide. The TPLF must leave no doubts lingering that they will ever play any part in compromising the political independence and territorial integrity of Ethiopia, which all members of the African Union are obliged to defend. In addition, we recommend the spirit of the following steps to all Ethiopian leaders, understanding that they are not easy to implement. 1, make immediate announcements to all citizens and to all militia and armed units that the targeting of civilians, and particularly women, is unacceptable and must stop immediately. 2, deconflict military movements in Tigray, Afar, and Amhara to enable unfettered access to humanitarian aid before famine returns to any part of Ethiopia. It is important that lines of communication between military leaders be opened for this purpose. 3, announce a willingness to stop hostilities and to engage in ceasefire. 4, for the parliament just voted into office, peace cannot be made with a political movement that has been labeled as a terrorist group. Parliament should prepare to lift this designation to allow for direct contact and negotiation with armed actors opposing the government. 5, for the government, tangibly demonstrate an embrace of the people of Tigray by resuming the provision of basic services to them. 6, accept the good offices of the African Union, the region, and the UN Secretary General as bridges to mediation and peace building. Mr. President, to this Security Council and the international community, we make the following recommendations. We call for the government of Eritrea to withdraw its forces from Ethiopia and embrace a role of peace building. We urge wealthy countries and organizations to provide adequate resources to the humanitarian campaigns in Ethiopia. 3, we call for the UN Development Program, the World Bank, the IMF, and all of Ethiopia's creditors to deliver an economic recovery package to implement the moment political mediation is underway. Number 4, we urge caution in the use of any unilateral coercive sanction measures that risk Ethiopia's economic collapse. Their use will only worsen the humanitarian crisis. To the African Union, we call for a re-energizing of the peace and security architecture. We have seen that its powerful capabilities contribute to resolving many conflict situations in the continent, and we believe they can be used in Ethiopia. Mr. President, allow us to conclude with a final caution. War is seductive. There are those who today in Ethiopia call for it to be given a chance. Such an attitude taps into a deep human desire for the clarity that enmity appears to offer. It promises simplicity instead of painful compromise, the annoying need to listen to the other, and the frustration that comes from trying to appreciate complexity. The Ethiopia of old inspired and rallied us Africans. It had challenges. It had known war and subjugation among and between its peoples, but its successful resistance to colonialism, racism, and fascism rallied our spirits. As Africans, we are conscious that this is our historical moment to recover our march to prosperity, peace, and independence from the actors who prefer us weak and divided. Ethiopia must not tap into its glorious history to solely grasp the grievances that lead to anger and hatred. Instead, Ethiopians must find in their past the prominent lessons of compromise, unity, and peace. We appeal to the leaders and people of Ethiopia to understand that they cannot break each other's spirits and succeed in building a united and prosperous country. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement. I would like to make a statement in my capacity as the representative of India. I join others in thanking the Secretary General for his comprehensive briefing and insights into the issue. I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Ethiopia in today's meeting. Let me begin by strongly condemning the terrorist attack in Kabul today. We extend our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims of this terrorist attack. Today's attacks reinforce the need for the world to stand unitedly against terrorism and all those who provide sanctuaries to terrorists. Today's meeting under the agenda item Peace and Security in Africa has been necessitated by the humanitarian situation in Tigray, which is witnessing continuing fighting between the Ethiopian Defense Forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. In recent weeks, the conflict has intensified and now been spread by one side, TPLF, to the neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar. The conflict is having a severe impact on the civilian population, particularly women, children, and the elderly, and has resulted in the killing of innocent civilians, human rights violations, and use of child soldiers. The unilateral ceasefire announced by the government of Ethiopia in June 2021 was an important step aimed at improving the worsening humanitarian situation. Unfortunately, the opportunity provided by the ceasefire seems not to have been grasped, with the continuing aggression and belligerence of one side and spread of fighting beyond Tigray region. The humanitarian cost and suffering due to the conflict is unfortunately mounting. This development has a potential to destabilize the larger Horn of Africa region. In our view, today's meeting should strengthen efforts towards a ceasefire, which is the need of the hour. In this context, we take note of the efforts of the government of Ethiopia and its leadership in addressing the situation. The government has been working with humanitarian partners, including the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the World Food Programme, and other agencies to alleviate the suffering of the people. We deeply appreciate the efforts of the Secretary General in this connection. The humanitarian access has been improving progressively with more convoys reaching the areas in need. This is demonstrated by the statistics provided by OCHA and WFP. The communication and coordination between the Ethiopian authorities and humanitarian agencies has improved significantly in recent weeks. We welcome the establishment of a regional emergency coordination center in Semera, comprising federal institutions, regional counterparts, WFP, and UN OCHA to facilitate the movement of trucks along Afar routes to Tigray and to coordinate emergency assistance to displaced people. We urge sustained close coordination between humanitarian agencies and the Ethiopian authorities to bridge the remaining gaps. At the same time, there is an urgent need to scale up efforts consistent with UN guiding principles for humanitarian assistance. At this juncture, Ethiopia needs all the support it can get from the international community. The international community should come together, treat the emerging situation with sensitivity and seriousness, and extend all possible humanitarian assistance to Ethiopia. The humanitarian agencies also need to take measures to avoid diversion of humanitarian aid. The government has undertaken investigation into cases of serious human rights violations, including through joint investigations with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We strongly denounce and condemn all atrocities committed by armed groups against civilians, including children. Those responsible for human rights violations and sexual violence perpetrated in Tigray should be prosecuted. For decades, Ethiopia has been an engine of economic growth in the Horn of Africa region. Today, Ethiopia needs support from the international community, including from the African Union and the United Nations, to address issues related to the conflict. The solution to the conflict must be Ethiopian-led and within the constitutional framework of Ethiopia. India continues to underscore the importance of mutual trust, engagement, dialogue, and reconciliation for lasting peace and stability. India reiterates its strong commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Ethiopia. Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you for allowing my country's participation in this meeting. I thank the Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his briefing, and I acknowledge the presence of Under-Secretary General Martin Griffiths. Mr. President, on the World Humanitarian Day last week, the Secretary General provided emphasis to the situation in my country. The government of Ethiopia appreciates the good faith engagement by the Secretary General. We appreciate the Secretary General call for ending the suffering of the Ethiopian people. This same objective will continue to drive the efforts of the government of Ethiopia, as was the case in the past 9 months following the treasonous and unforgettable attack against the northern command of the Ethiopian National Defense Force by TPLF. Excellencies, in previous discussion on the situation of my country, I tried to give a broader perspective on the problem where we are facing. The current state of affairs in Ethiopia did not transpire overnight. They were in the making long before the TPLF unleashed attack on the northern command of the NDF in the dark hours of November 4. The genesis of the current conflict goes back at least 3 decades ago. Since 1991, TPLF maintained hegemonic control over the political, security, and economic life of the Ethiopian people. During this time, the TPLF faced resistance at every turn in all corners of Ethiopia. We must recall that it was sustained popular protest that dislodged the TPLF from the political power in 2018, ushering in a promising period of transition. TPLF was dispelled not only from power, but also from the hearts and minds of Ethiopian people due to the non-evolving and destructive ideology it seeks to preserve in the Ethiopian body politic. The people of Ethiopia outprogressed this political elite that stand vanguard for division over unity, oligarchy over equal opportunity, favoritism over merit. When it lost power, the TPLF retreated to Tigray, taking our people in Tigray as hostage, because as the saying goes, for those accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Still, despite numerous provocations, the Ethiopian government exercised maximum restraint until the group attacked and looted military barracks. Over the last 9 months, the government sought to uphold the constitutional order. The TPLF refused to disarm and surrender to law enforcement authorities, doubling down on its destructive agenda. Mr. President, the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire declared in June and the subsequent withdrawal of the National Defense Force from Tigray was supposed to bring calm to the region and its people and provide space for the TPLF leadership to reconsider its ruinous course. Our plan was to allow a peaceful farming season in Tigray. It was supposed to pave the way for the uninhibited flow of humanitarian assistance for the people in need. If it went according to our plan and vision, the ceasefire would have allowed us to embark on rebuilding and reconstruction in the region, and the repair and reconnection of infrastructure and economic apparatus disrupted by the TPLF. Also, children in Tigray would have already begun preparation for the 2014 school year. It is 2014 in Ethiopia, it is 2020 in the Gregorian calendar. That is set to begin next September. We had also wished for members of the TPLF that showed signals of willingness for peace to successfully advance their position and convince their peers to abide by the law and follow the path of peace. The government's commitment for peace was given no regard by the TPLF, who called the ceasefire a joke, and also by members of the international community that tolerated, enabled, and condemned the group to follow its destructive path. The repeated plea for ceasefire was ignored, and we now have Ethiopian children in Tigray subjected to forced recruitment to serve as cannon fodders. We also see aid distribution conditioned to parents giving away their children to war. Not only farmers in the Tigray region, but also those in adjacent Afar and Amhara region are now unable to farm their land, exposing them to the indigeneity of receiving aid to sustain their family. Hundreds of thousands in Afar and Amhara region are displaced and have sustained irreparable damage for their well-being. In absolute disregard for the well-being of people and in greedy pursuit, whatever is there to be acquired by creating mayhem on the very people it purports to stand for, TPLF blocked humanitarian aid. The group also engaged in formalization of fronts between internal and external actors bent on destabilizing the great nation that is Ethiopia. In this regard, we see a clear coordination between these internal treasonous elements and external actors from near and afar that have opened a multidimensional offensive to obstruct Ethiopia's right to use its natural resources. Mr. President, as to humanitarian assistance, the government of Ethiopia is fully cognizant of its obligation to its citizens. Sensationalization and politicization of our situation doesn't inform our response. We will continue to deliver on our obligation using all means and allocating all available resources. In this regard, the government of Ethiopia first is committed to hastening clearance of humanitarian convoys. In fact, we are committed to reducing the number of checkpoints and to fast-track scanning process. We are working with partners to introduce modern scanning technology. Second, we'll continue to consider requests for humanitarian flights. World Food Program and the National Disaster Risk Management Commission are administrating their humanitarian flights with no impediment. Third, we'll continue to provide cash and manage it in a predictable and sustainable manner for all humanitarian agencies. Similarly, the resumption of public service requires peace and rule of law in Tigray. These essential services cannot be reconnected while the group that today killed 33 infrastructure operators and engineers, looted aid, diverted aid, and confiscated humanitarian convoys continues to persist on its destructive path of war. Mr. President, our goal is peace. Unfortunately, the TPLF is standing between Ethiopia and peace. TPLF is not the victim, it is the culprit. The people of Ethiopia, especially those in Afar, Amhara, and Tigray region, are living under undeserved and insufferable conditions. We are started by everyone that appears to have been calling for peace and pressure the government for suspension of its law enforcement operation, to later on tolerate and ratify through their reticence the expansion of violence and mayhem by the TPLF. Our plea to all, with a sincere wish to help us realize peace, is to put pressure on this lawless group to stop its criminal advance, to abandon preparation for combat and abide by the laws of the country. The group must also irrefutably delink itself from internal and external sponsors and affiliates. As to the international community, we ask you to remove the actual or perceived support emanating from your side that this group feeds off. It has to only comply with the requirements set by the government and free the people of Tigray from its egoistically grip. Absent compliance with the laws of the country, the government of Ethiopia will apply and any means necessary to ensure law and order. Regarding some of the unsubstantiated assertions we heard today, we call upon members of the council to be cautious about facts and misinformation that has dominated the scene. There is no discrimination based on any ground, including ethnicity, religious, or any other background. We are not people with less moral. We are people of values. We survived for centuries through social cohesion. We built unity while honoring differences. The Ethiopian reform is all about how to strengthen our unity and live in harmony. The reform is not to learn to die through ethnic divisions, as has been professed, propagated, and implemented by TPLF for over 30 years. Mr. President, I would like to use this opportunity to express our gratitude for all of you who stood with us in times of our need. At the same time, we respectfully assert our sovereign integrity as an ancient, independent African country on a constant strive to overcome its challenges. In this regard, I would like to underscore the severe mentality that seeks to undermine the sovereign right and responsibility of states of their own security and well-being of their people have proven harmful in very many instances. We only hope the right lesson are learned. Evidently, Ethiopia is not a country that allows delegating the shaping of its future. The international community has witnessed undue foreign pressure and interference is not appreciated by a soul in my country. And after the fact regret and admission of failure in foreign policy will not help. Hence, we call on everyone concerned to work with us. We are ready to work with all well-intentioned partners. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of Ethiopia for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I'll now adjourn the meeting so that the council can continue its discussions on the subject in closed consultations. And I would request observers to kindly exit the chamber as soon as I adjourn the meeting. Meeting is adjourned.